today's session is to show you some of the 10 best advanced techniques that you can use when you're prompting your different models. And these techniques you can use for all types of models. You can use for ChatGPT, you can use for Claude, you can use for Grok, whatever model, Gemini. Use the same techniques, and with these techniques you're able to extract more from the model itself. You're able to do more. You're able to show that you have more advanced skills. You're on your way to becoming a celebrated prompt engineer. So these are techniques that we use within the industry to try and extract more, especially when we do things that automate requests from models. You don't have the time to ask multiple questions in order to get the answer. You want to get a prompt right to begin with. So let's get started. If you have any questions, do feel free to put comments in on LinkedIn. I'm monitoring LinkedIn as well, and you can put comments in the chat as well. And if you want to join Zoom directly, you can feel free to. Let me see if I want to share the link, or let's just get going. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Let me get the invite. I'm just going to copy the link so that those on LinkedIn can join directly if they wish. Okay. Right, so that's done. That's a bit of housekeeping. Do feel free to ask questions if you have any. So on that note, let's get started. So we'll look at 10 advanced techniques, and we'll try some of those in a sec. So what's the point in learning these advanced techniques? It's about moving your knowledge from basic prompting, amateur prompting, to extracting more from the mind of the large language model. Now, the large language model is an expert in so many different fields, and all of the fields that it's been trained in, and you can't possibly have as much knowledge as it does. And sometimes you don't have as in-depth knowledge as it has, as you ought to have if you're an expert. And you may not want to be an expert in a field, but you do want to be able to have access to that expert knowledge. So how do you do that? You can go in and ask the amateur questions, in which case you get the amateur answers, or you can go more in depth, use some of these techniques to extract a bit more. So we'll look at some of these techniques, the 10 top ones that I have selected. We'll also look at some of the examples and the context in which you can use those techniques. So the first technique I want to share is the persona conditioning. So this is where you tell ChatGPT to act like a specific type of person. Now, typically you'd say, yes, that's basic prompting, but not everybody uses that. Not everybody understands the fact that even though you're asking one question, you can get an answer from different contexts, from different settings. And in which case, if you're asking a question, such as the example suggests, health tips, the health tips you get from the standpoint of a doctor could differ from the standpoint of somebody who is into alternative medicine or that kind of thing. And as an example, if you ask someone into alternative medicine, the type of treatments and the type of care you should use if you're recovering from a physical injury, could be something. They might say do yoga, they might say do stretches, they might say go to the woods to breathe in some fresh air. A doctor might prescribe medication for you. So those are different contexts, and you can get ChatGPT or any model to provide you answers from those different contexts. The next one is prompt chaining. Now, this prompt chaining is very, very important for you to add to your armory. Why? Because when you are asking questions, you can give ChatGPT the different sequence of answers you want, or the different aspects of this initial question you want answered. So as an example, you'd want to build a complexity of your response based on the top question you're asking. So as an example, explain climate change simply, right? Simple, fine. The next question could be, list 3 ways it affects coastal cities, and then the final one would be suggest ways to reduce these effects. You can send all these 3 prompts in one go. You don't have to send one, wait for the response to come back, then send the other. And in many ways, you want all of that reasoning and that thinking to happen once, and then you get all of the response back. You need to think about how many tokens are being sent back and forth, and it could actually save you some tokens, if not save you money directly. So that's prompt chaining. You've put a chain of prompts, and they tend to be prompts that are related to one another. They're not completely different things that you're asking the model to respond with. So meta prompting. So meta prompting is where you ask an initial question, the response comes back, and then you tell ChatGPT to review its own question and provide you a final answer, provide a refined answer. So what that does is that it gives you the very best of, or a better version of its initial response. So it feels more like when you ask the first question, ChatGPT rushes to get you an answer, right, based on the prompt. Now, when it brings it back and you tell it to review the answer it's given, more times than not, it will find an issue with that answer and it will refine it. And that's one technique that people use to create unique content. So they start by asking an initial question, give it the best prompt they can come up with. The answer comes back. They then take that response that was sent by ChatGPT and send it back to itself and say, review this answer, set it to this kind of tone, make sure everything's accurate, and send me a final response. So that final response is then refined, is more accurate in many cases, because sometimes you can ask it to validate that the response is correct, and through that process a lot of errors get corrected. So that's something to think about, and it's called meta prompting. Very crucial. The next technique is instructional prompt formatting. So this is where you tell ChatGPT or your model to clearly define for the model how the answer is going to be presented. Now let's try this one, so it's not just theory we're talking about. So write 2 short paragraphs summarizing To Kill a Mockingbird for secondary school students. Include 2 quotes. So we've defined how we want the answer to appear. So if we go into ChatGPT here now, and we say, just paste the exact prompt here, write 2 short paragraphs summarizing To Kill a Mockingbird for secondary school students, include 2 quotes, and we fire it off. So think about this. You haven't had to read To Kill a Mockingbird. It knows about To Kill a Mockingbird. It's been trained with it, so it knows what you're talking about. And yeah, there you go. So it's given us 2 quotes, and they're in double quotes here. So you can see it tells us who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Then it talks about the story summarized here at the beginning, and then here it includes these 2 quotes. I believe these are the 2 quotes it's provided. Okay, so here we've been clear on what the output needs to be, what the result we're expecting should be, and that's part of the technique you need to use. So apply this to whatever you're doing. If you're an accountant, for instance, you could put in some spreadsheet, load it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this and provide me with the top expenses and the month that generated the most amount of revenue. You could do that. So you've told it exactly what you want the output to be like. So that's instructional prompt formatting. That's where you told it, you specified what the output should be like. The next technique to use, and this one is very useful for determining how you want the model to handle your question and how you want it to provide the answer. And this is called few shot prompting, and shot in there just means examples. So when you send your question into ChatGPT, you provide it with examples of what its response should be like. So let's take these examples and then put them in, and you see what I mean. The main question you have, I mean, this is a very simple example, but you can come up with something that's relevant to your daily work. Like you could tell it to write emails and give it examples of how you want the emails to appear, and those examples are your shots. So give it a few shots, 1 or 2, and then the response would mirror the tone of the examples you gave it. So let's go into ChatGPT. We can use the same session. Hopefully it'll be fine. If I say 4 plus 4, 4 plus 4 equals 8. Okay, so now let's give it an example and say 2 plus 2, because that, now what is 4 plus 4? It should be the same as what it's above there. So okay, so you can see it's given us an example based on what we pasted in, not just the 4 plus 4. So we specified exactly how we want the answer to come out. It's similar to the previous one, so yeah, it's perhaps not the most in-depth example, but it's just to tell you what it's like. You could say, as an example, we could say, all right, write a couple of emails to my boss requesting time off, right? And then say examples. Hey boss, I want time off. Thanks. You. All right, that's one example. You could say, hey, for a week, all right, so let's see what it comes back with. Okay, so you see, hey boss, I require time off for reasons, important ones. So it's follow the example I've given, and that's what's determined how it's provided this email. If you've ever asked ChatGPT to write an email, you'd know that it goes really verbose and it's a lot more professional, a lot more formal than this. So this is just giving you an example of what a few shot looks like. Now, if you want to carry on learning a lot more about these prompting and different techniques, yes, we've got a few more that we'll go through. I did mention we'll share 10. We offer an AI mastery program, which right now is ongoing, and we've got students who are learning about this type of thing, prompting. Next lesson is going to be more about brainstorming and using prompting, these different prompting techniques to extract a lot from the large language model, or extract things like business ideas and ways to approach businesses, and we use the model and the AI to help us come up with the demographics and how to approach those demographics, and what to spend and what not to expend, and how much the demographic will spend or pay towards the course. So do feel free to join us. The link is right at the bottom here, besteverydayai.com/course, and it's going now. Join us immediately and you can learn a lot more about advanced prompting. So back to the prompting techniques. So the next technique is prompt injection for memory. So what this means is that, let's say you're working through ChatGPT and asking loads of questions. You may get to the point where it starts to forget the initial questions that you asked and some of the responses it provided. And one way to make sure you keep it on track and make sure that it remembers what it's talking about or the context in which it's providing a response, you can copy the output from a previous response that it provided and paste that back in. Or you can prompt it by saying, okay, remember what we spoke about when we talked about X, right? If it's forgotten in its context, you have to paste it back in so it can reuse it. But that's a way to jog its memory and to make it use the correct bit of information when it's trying to process a response for you. This helps with your continuity of what you're asking for. This is especially useful as well and with some other models where you generate code, and then if you ask it to generate even more code and do some more vibe coding, it starts to go off on a tangent. And really, one way to bring it back is to copy the previous information back into the context and send that to ChatGPT. So that's memory. In terms of the next technique, think about how you calibrate the prompt. You want to tell it how you want it to provide you with the information, right? You want to give it an idea as to the level of creativity, the style of response, and any tone that you want it to observe. So here are some examples. You can say, summarize the real history of the internet, right? if you neglect to put in real, it could come up with a funny story, it could come up with a comedy, it could come up with anything. But if you say the real history of the internet, it knows that you want accuracy from the information it's bringing out. Now, for those more advanced in using these models, there's a concept called a temperature. But typically from ChatGPT, you don't have access to that temperature. But if you do have access to the temperature, the higher the temperature, the more creative the model is. The lower, the less creative. So in this case, if you want it to be real and you have access to the temperature, you'd really want to dial down the temperature value so that it doesn't make up any stories. Now the next example, which is a creative example, you're saying to it, make up a funny story of how the internet was accidentally invented. For this one, you'd really want it to be very creative. So again, if you have access to the temperature, you want to increase the temperature and make it more creative, and that way it would bring random ideas from all sorts of parts of its memory, and that way you have a more creative story. You have a story that is less predictable and sounds less like what everyone else has access to, or less like what most people will produce. The next technique to think about is the self-debate prompting technique. So the self-debate prompting technique is about getting the model to debate itself, to ask itself questions, and to present a view from different angles. So as an example, here's a prompt you could put in. Argue both sides about working from home. List pros and cons clearly. Okay, so this means that the model would have to search for information that backs working from home, and then also search for information that goes contrary to the pros. So that's a way of getting the model to debate an idea more holistically. And when you receive the information that it provides, it's a lot more, you have a lot more rounded perspective of the particular topic that you've asked it to talk about. So it's more akin to critical thinking. So you know both sides, and you're able to you are better informed. Okay, the next one is explicit reasoning triggers. Now, this is more commonly called step-by-step thinking, and the purpose of this is the earlier models used to hallucinate when you asked maths questions, but when you said step by step, it was able to get the answer correctly. And that was a very strange thing, but it's something that's research backed. If you tell the model to think step by step, it's better able to reason through the question that you've presented to it, and is better able to give you a more accurate answer. So all you have to do when you're prompting it is just put step by step and then give it the question. You can write it in words as well, so that it sounds like a natural language, but the moment you put step by step, it knows that it has to reason and provide you the answer. Now, how this differs from your reasoning models is unclear, but it seems that they do similar things. But if you don't have access to the reasoning model, you have access to a normal model. You just put step by step, and then say an item costs £50, it gets 30% discount, then 10% tax. What's the final price? So it goes step by step. So it tells you the original price, then it applies a discount, then adds a 10% tax, and then gives you a final amount. Now, hopefully this is correct. I've not done the maths myself, but this is how you want it to go through the question and tell you how it's reasoning through getting to an answer. Now, if this is incorrect and you know what the correct answer is, you can look through the steps that it's taken, and you can say, well, okay, I now understand why the answer is what it is. It should be different. So this is something to bear in mind and think about, especially if you're doing anything to do, if you're creating any automations. Okay, so next one is output framing. This is more like telling it how you want the output it provides or produces to appear. So the example here is give 3 quick negotiation tips. So it knows to provide you with just 3 tips that you can use in your smart app or whatever downstream context. You can also make it more of a structured output, like say create a CSV file, so that's a comma separated value file, or you can say create a JSON file or create a list. All those things can be defined by yourself. If you don't define what the result or the outcome should be like, in all likelihood you just get a page full of text, and can be difficult to follow if it will be better presented in table format. So in conclusion, this brings us to the end of today's session. The key thing is, or the key takeaway from today should be, you need to start moving your prompting skills to the more advanced stage so that you can get more from the model than most people would. And then think about the different techniques that you might use, the prompt chaining technique, the iterative style of querying the model. And then keep practicing and keep noticing the differences. And as you get more advanced, you'd notice that different models provide answers in different ways, especially when you add more to the prompt and more to what you're asking. And that way you get to know which model is best for which type of question. So you might say, some argue that the Claude is better for research and is better for code than ChatGPT, and others would say ChatGPT is great for drawing, especially the most recent models. So think about what model would do what for you, or what model will solve which problem, especially now that there are still subtle differences between all the available large language models. So always use clear prompts. This means you get better answers. Use the techniques that we've talked about. You can start with the first one, practice that for a while, and then move on to the next. I personally love using the step-by-step one and the meta prompting. Those two feature quite prominently in my prompting. And then keep practicing, because the more you practice, the better you get at using these tools. So does anyone have any questions? Let's see if there are any questions on LinkedIn. Okay, I don't see any questions on LinkedIn. Nothing in Zoom. Okay, so we'll call it there. So thank you for your time. Until next time, we'll do this again on Friday. We'll go through some other AI category, and the whole point is for us to learn together, understand what it is we're trying to do together, and make the most of this AI phase that we're in. So we've just looked at 10 techniques, advanced prompting techniques. Use the potential that these techniques provide you with to extract a lot more from the large language model, and the whole goal is to become a prompt engineering expert. And don't forget, you can join our course. It's besteverydayai.com/course.